Single dad pulled a woman from a car wreck. She turned out to be the CEO interviewing him tomorrow. The snow was falling in thick wind-lashed sheets as Jack Carter squinted through the windshield of his aging sedan. The wipers groaned with every pass, barely keeping up. He leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the desolate stretch of road that curved along the East River under the flickering lights of the Manhattan Bridge. It was past midnight, and the city had grown quiet, at least above ground. Below, the weight of winter New York felt like it had stopped breathing. Jack's shift had ended an hour ago. He'd spent the evening repairing a busted HVAC unit at a third-rate motel that refused to heat more than one room at a time. His back ached. His fingers were cracked from the cold. And yet, he wasn't in a hurry. Emma would be asleep by now, curled up in their small one-bedroom apartment with the stuffed rabbit she refused to part with, no matter how threadbare its ears became. As he reached the bend near South Street, his headlights caught a violent flash of movement, metal snow, and glass flying in a chaotic burst. Jack slammed the brakes. His tires skidded, fishtailed, then found traction. A black SUV had crashed through the guardrail, spinning out, striking the concrete barrier hard enough to twist the frame. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood, and one tire continued to spin uselessly. "God," Jack muttered. No other cars, no voices, just the hissing and the flurry of snow that swallowed sound. Without thinking, he threw the car into park and ran. The wind ripped through his jacket. His boots crunched over ice as he crossed the distance, his breath ragged. He reached the wreck and yanked the driver's side door jammed. He darted to the passenger side and found it crumpled but not locked. Inside, a woman was slumped against the deployed airbag, blood trickling down from a gash above her eyebrow. Her chest rose and fell shallow but steady. "Hey," Jack yelled, knocking snow from his gloves and brushing hair from her face. "Hey, can you hear me?" She groaned faintly. The smoke was getting thicker. He could smell something, fuel, maybe oil. He didn't wait to confirm. Jack reached in, unbuckled her, and gently pulled her limp body toward him. She was slender, but not small, and dead weight was always heavier than it looked. Her left foot caught on the console. He tugged harder. The car groaned like something underneath was breaking. He got her out just as flames licked beneath the engine block. Snow swirled around them as he dragged her a safe distance and lowered her onto the frozen grass. His jacket came off in one motion, and he wrapped it around her as she trembled, half-conscious. "Don't move," he said gently. "Help's coming." She looked up at him with dazed, unfocused eyes. "You saved me." She whispered the words, barely audible over the wind. "What's your name?" Jack shook his head. "That doesn't matter. You're safe now." The sound of sirens approached, wailing and growing louder, bouncing off the underpass. Blue and red lights cut through the blizzard as the paramedics rushed toward them. Jack backed away. One EMT crouched beside her. "What's her name?" "Don't know," Jack replied. "She was in the wreck when I found her. You didn't call this in." He shook his head. Didn't have time. Another medic motioned for him to get checked, but Jack raised his hands. "I'm fine," he said, already stepping back toward the road. The woman turned her head weakly in his direction. Their eyes met for just a second, hers full of pain, confusion, maybe even gratitude. But then she was surrounded by responders, and Jack Carter, quiet, invisible. Jack faded back into the darkness. 15 minutes later, he sat behind the wheel of his car again, his hands still trembling as the heater blasted warm air over his face. His jacket was gone. His shirt was damp with melted snow, but his heartbeat had finally begun to slow. He didn't know why he hadn't told them his name. He just didn't want to. It didn't feel right to make it about him. As he pulled back into the slow-moving traffic, Jack allowed himself one glance in the rearview mirror. He could still see the ambulance's flashing lights reflected in the night sky. But the woman, whoever she was gone now, and soon she would forget him too. He exhaled deeply and whispered to himself, "It's enough she's alive." What Jack didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the woman he had just saved wasn't just anyone. She was Ava Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries. And in exactly 72 hours, she would be sitting across from him in a glass-walled conference room, holding the final decision over the only job that might save his daughter's life. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, all that existed was a man who didn't walk away, and a life he refused to let slip into the dark. The knock came just after sunrise, quiet but firm. Jack Carter stirred from the worn recliner where he'd fallen asleep still in yesterday's clothes. The blanket that usually covered his legs was now wrapped around his daughter Emma, who lay curled up on the couch a few feet away. Her cheeks were flushed with warmth, her breathing soft. Jack smiled, then rubbed his eyes stiff from sleeping upright. Another knock, more insistent. He opened the door to reveal Mrs. Rivera, their elderly neighbor from across the hall, holding a small paper bag and wearing her usual mismatched cardigan and floral slippers. "I brought those cranberry muffins Emma likes," she said, brushing snow off her shoulders. "And you got a call. They left a message on my landline." Sounded important. Jack blinked. A call, who had she handed him a scribbled note with a number and a name. Whitmore Industries. Some lady named Kayla. Jack's heart skipped. "Whitmore," he repeated, barely believing it. "That's what I said." She smiled kindly, then looked over his shoulder. "How's she doing?" Better Jack said. "She had a rough night. Cough wouldn't let her sleep." Mrs. Rivera nodded. "You go call them. I'll stay with Emma for a bit." Jack didn't argue. Minutes later, he was in the hallway outside, cell phone pressed to his ear, listening to a crisp voice on the other end. "Mr. Carter, this is Kayla Reynolds, executive assistant to Ms. Ava Whitmore. We'd like to invite you to interview for the facilities supervisor position. Are you available this Friday at 10 a.m.? Jack nearly dropped the phone. He had applied to Whitmore Industries months ago. It was a long shot, a top-tier company with top-tier benefits. The kind of job that came with a steady salary, health insurance, and the stability he desperately needed for Emma's treatments. But he'd heard nothing back. Not even a rejection. And now... "Yes," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, I'm available." Later that day, Jack stood in the bathroom staring at his reflection. He'd shaved for the first time in weeks, trying to tame the graying stubble along his jawline. He adjusted the collar of his cleanest button-down shirt, the one he saved for church on Easter. The corners were a bit frayed, but it was the best he had. Emma sat on the edge of the bathtub, swinging her legs. "You look nice, Daddy." "Thanks, Peanut. Are they going to give you the job?" Jack crouched down beside her, smoothing her hair back gently. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm going to try." She looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "I hope they say yes. Then you don't have to work late anymore. And we can go to the aquarium." Jack smiled, swallowing the tightness rising in his throat. That's the plan. Friday arrived with icy wind and a sky heavy with clouds. Jack walked into the Whitmore building, a modern glass-paneled skyscraper in Midtown with palms damp and heart thudding. The lobby gleamed all steel and silence. Polished floors reflected overhead lights like mirrors. People in suits moved swiftly, confidently. Jack felt like he'd stepped into another world. The receptionist greeted him with a brief smile and pointed him to the 29th floor. "Miss Whitmore will see you shortly." Jack's elevator ride was silent but nerve-wracking. He rehearsed answers in his head, his experience, his skills, why he wanted the job. But as the doors opened, his thoughts fell away. The conference room was walled with glass overlooking a gray Manhattan skyline. A long table ran through the center, and at the head of it, standing tall in a slate-gray suit with a scarf wrapped lightly at her throat, was the woman from the crash. Jack froze. She was unmistakable, though her hair was neatly tied back now, and the bruise near her temple had faded to a faint shadow. She looked composed. Regal, almost. But her eyes, the same eyes he had seen wide with pain in the cold, were on him now. And they widened just slightly with recognition. A flicker passed between them. Jack blinked once, unsure if she would say anything. He half expected her to stand up and say, "You're the man who pulled me from the wreck." But she didn't. She smiled with the cool precision of a professional and gestured to the seat across from her. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, her voice like polished glass. "Thank you for coming in." Jack sat down, his heart thudding. She remembers. He could see it in her eyes. But why wasn't she saying anything? The interview began. Ava's questions were sharp-focused. She probed his knowledge of HVAC systems, electrical schematics, emergency protocols. She asked about how he would handle supply chain issues, union coordination, overnight maintenance schedules. Jack answered the best he could, drawing on years of hands-on experience. He wasn't polished. He didn't use corporate buzzwords. But his voice was steady, his answers thoughtful. What confused him was her intensity, not hostility, but curiosity. Like she wasn't just evaluating his resume. She was trying to see through him, and still not one word about that night. After 30 minutes, she closed the folder in front of her. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. We'll be in touch by Monday." Jack rose, nodded politely, and offered a tight smile. "Thank you for the opportunity." As he turned to leave, her voice followed him. "Mr. Carter." He paused. Ava tilted her head, and for the first time her voice softened. "Why did you leave before the ambulance arrived?" Jack turned slowly, puzzled. "I didn't want to be in the way." Her eyes lingered on his face. "That's rare," she said quietly. Jack held her gaze for a beat, then simply replied, "Sometimes doing the right thing means you don't need to be seen." Ava didn't answer. She simply watched as he turned again and walked out of the room. Only when the door clicked shut behind him did she finally allow herself to exhale. Yes, it was him. And somehow that changed everything. Ava Whitmore stood alone in the conference room after Jack Carter had gone, the silence folding around her like a second skin. She remained still, fingers pressed lightly to her lips, eyes lingering on the chair he had just vacated. The city, beyond the glass, seemed far away, its noise muffled by the weight of what she had just seen, what she had just confirmed. It was him, the man from the snowstorm, the man who had pulled her from the wreckage with bare hands, wrapped her in his jacket, and vanished before she could thank him. She had remembered the voice first, calm, steady, urgent. Then the eyes, honest, steady, not asking for anything, not even a name. And now he sat across from her in a buttoned-up shirt hair, slightly unruly, answering technical questions with quiet humility. No mention of what he had done, no glint of expectation. She had built her career on instinct, reading people faster than they could read themselves. And yet this man had blindsided her. Ava exhaled, her mind buzzing with contradictions. If she acknowledged him as her rescuer, would he think she brought him here out of guilt, out of obligation? That wouldn't be fair to him or to herself. She needed time. Meanwhile, Jack stepped into the elevator with a strange mix of relief and confusion. The interview had gone better than expected, but his nerves hadn't settled. There had been something unusual in the way Ava looked at him, curious, searching. Did she know? No, he told himself. It was just coincidence. She wouldn't remember him from that night. It had been dark, chaotic. Her head was bleeding. She probably never saw his face. Still, the way she paused at the end, the question about leaving before the ambulance came. Why would she ask that he walked out of the building, boots crunching the slush on the curb, his breath fogging in the frigid air? He pulled his coat tighter. The scarf he usually wore, he realized with a quiet jolt, was still with her. He had left it wrapped around her that night. Jack smiled to himself, barely. He didn't need the scarf back. Back at the office, Ava returned to her corner suite and sat heavily behind her desk. She stared at the email draft on her screen for a full minute before deleting it entirely. Instead, she reached for her phone. "Kayla," she said when her assistant picked up. "I want a full background check on Jack Carter, education, work, history, family." Quietly. There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "No," Ava said softly. "Not wrong. Just different." That evening, Jack picked up Emma from Mrs. Rivera's apartment across the hall. She ran into his arms with a gleeful squeal, her little backpack bouncing behind her. "How'd it go?" Mrs. Rivera asked, passing him Emma's lunchbox. "I think—" "Okay," Jack replied. "She didn't throw me out, so that's something." Mrs. Rivera chuckled, then gave him a look, gentle but probing. "You know, Jack, sometimes life circles back in the strangest ways." Jack furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "Just a feeling," she said, smiling as she turned back toward her apartment. "Sometimes people who show up out of nowhere, they're not really strangers." Jack held Emma's hand as they stepped into their own small apartment. Her hand was warm in his. "Did you get the job, Daddy?" "Not yet," he said, kneeling to meet her eyes. "But we might be close." She tilted her head. "If you do get it, can we get blueberry pancakes again?" "Like on your birthday." Jack laughed softly, pulling her into a hug. "Yeah, Peanut, I think we can manage that." At Whitmore Industries, Ava sat alone in her office, staring at the security camera footage from the crash site. She had acquired the recording 2 days ago from the city's traffic control center after filing a formal request. It had taken time, but she had insisted. On screen, the black SUV careened into the barrier's snow, exploding like smoke. A long moment passed. Then came the blur of movement, a man running toward the wreck. She watched it again, eyes fixed on his form as he wrenched the passenger door open and pulled her out, stumbling in the snow, wrapping her in his coat and laying her down with a gentleness she hadn't felt in years. There was something about the way he looked at her even on camera. Not pity, not awe, just purpose. Ava closed the laptop. Her heart thudded. She had made it to the top by guarding herself by believing that people always wanted something money, power, access. But Jack had walked away from her that night. He didn't know who she was. He didn't ask. And that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The following morning, Jack received an email from Whitmore Industries. He opened it with trembling fingers. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Carter. We are pleased to move you forward to the final consideration round. Details to follow." His shoulders sagged with relief. For the first time in a long time, something had gone right. And yet, the image of Ava's eyes lingered in his mind. She knew. He could feel it. Back at Whitmore, Ava stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her office, arms crossed, watching the city unfurl in pale morning light. Snow had stopped. The streets below gleamed with salt and thawing ice. She tapped her fingers against her elbow, mind still restless. Jack Carter was not like the others who had passed through her company's doors, ambitious, performative, rehearsed. He was real. And she wasn't sure what to do with that. But one thing was certain, he was no longer just a name on a resume. He was the man who didn't walk away. And for reasons she couldn't explain, maybe didn't want to, she wasn't ready to walk away either. The basement of Whitmore Tower was a far cry from the executive suites above. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow on rows of utility panels and boiler tanks that hummed like distant thunder. Jack stood with a wrench in one hand and a clipboard in the other, double-checking the settings on the backup generator. It had been 1 week since the interview, and Ava Whitmore had made her decision. He was hired. Just like that. No fanfare, no personal note. A formal email, crisp and direct like everything else about her. Jack hadn't seen Ava since that day in the glass-walled room. In fact, he'd barely glimpsed her at all, save for one fleeting moment in the elevator where she entered with 2 board members and didn't acknowledge him beyond the briefest of nods. And yet he could still feel her presence like static in the air. He didn't know what to make of her silence. She hadn't mentioned the night of the crash, hadn't thanked him, hadn't even hinted that she remembered. But something told Jack it wasn't forgotten. Not by her, and certainly not by him. New guy, someone called from behind. Jack turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man approaching with a clipboard of his own and a sideways smile. "I'm Luke, head of overnight crew. You're Carter-right." "Yeah." "Jack." Luke extended a hand. "We've heard about you." Jack raised an eyebrow. Already Luke smirked. Hard not to. Word is, Miss Whitmore herself requested you for this role. People talk. Jack's expression remained neutral. I just came here to do my job. Luke tilted his head, studying him. That's rare around here. Most folks come to be seen. You just come to work. Jack gave a small shrug. I've got a daughter. I don't have time for politics. Luke clapped him on the shoulder. You'll fit right in with the night crew. By week's end, Jack had repaired 2 ventilation faults, reprogrammed a malfunctioning control panel, and climbed into a crawlspace to fix a burst pipe that others had avoided for months. He didn't complain. He didn't grandstand. He just did the work and did it well. But not everyone was impressed. In a high-level meeting on the 30th floor, Gregory Sloan, COO of Whitmore Industries and Ava's longtime lieutenant, slammed a folder onto the glass table. This Carter guy, he said, voice taut. Where did he even come from? Ava, seated at the head of the table, didn't look up. He came from our applicant pool. He was qualified. He was buried in the bottom third. Gregory shot back. You bypassed protocol. No second interview. No peer review. Why Ava finally met his gaze. Because I saw something the system didn't. Gregory leaned forward. You're going soft. We're heading into Q4 under pressure. This is not the time to experiment. Ava's eyes hardened. He's not an experiment. He's a solution. Gregory leaned back, lips pursed. He's also a wild card. Quiet types tend to have something to hide. Ava paused, voice cool. Maybe it's that the loud ones have already shown their hands. Gregory scowled but said nothing more. He'd known Ava long enough to recognize that tone. Debate was over. Downstairs, Jack was crouched in a utility hallway checking wiring that had shorted during last night's snow. The chill from the outside seeped in through the concrete walls, but he was used to discomfort. What he wasn't used to still was the silence that followed him. It wasn't just quiet, it was intentional. People had started to notice. Some avoided eye contact. Others whispered when he passed. Jack tried to shrug it off, but the feeling crawled under his skin. After hours, he asked Luke about it. They think you're connected, Luke said, wiping his hands on a rag. Connected. Luke nodded. To Ava. To Sloan. To someone. Nobody comes in here and jumps protocol without strings. Jack sighed, leaning back against a panel. I don't have strings. Just a sick kid and a second chance. Luke studied him for a long moment. Then you better be twice as good and half as visible. They don't like what they can't explain. That night, Jack returned home just after midnight. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch again, her little body curled around the rabbit she refused to replace. He picked her up, gently, tucked her into bed, then sat on the edge of the mattress watching her breathe. There were days he felt like a ghost walking through a world that barely acknowledged him. But here, in this small apartment with its chipped paint and leaky faucet, he was still needed. Still seen. He reached into the drawer and pulled out the hospital bill he hadn't opened yet. $3,840, just for the latest round of Emma's tests. He folded it slowly, setting it aside. This job, it had to work. There was no plan B. Upstairs, Ava lingered in her office long after the building had emptied. She stood by the window watching the snow begin to fall again, softer this time. She had reviewed Jack's personnel file twice. His credentials were solid. His references glowed. But that wasn't why she'd hired him. It was what he'd done when no one was looking. She hadn't forgotten the feel of his jacket still damp with snow. Or the way he'd said, "You're safe now," like it was a promise he meant with his whole life. And he had left, without waiting to be thanked. That mattered more than any resume. Still, she had remained silent, partly out of uncertainty, partly out of fear. Fear that acknowledging what had happened might change everything, make it feel transactional. But silence had its cost. She turned from the window and looked down at her desk. On top sat a sealed envelope, an invitation to the annual corporate reception next Friday. Black tie, dozens of eyes, and always politics. She slid it aside. Maybe it was time to disrupt the script. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that what happened that night wasn't real. Ava picked up her phone, scrolled to Jack Carter's employee file, and paused. She didn't call him. Not yet. But something had shifted. Because in a world full of people fighting to be seen, she had just begun to notice the only man who wasn't trying at all. And that was precisely what made him unforgettable. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving behind a thin, glittering crust on the city's shoulders. Jack Carter stood in the modest kitchen of his apartment buttoning Emma's coat while balancing her small pink lunchbox under one arm. "You sure you're okay coming with me today?" he asked, crouching to zip her up. Emma nodded enthusiastically, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mrs. Rivera has that doctor appointment, right?" Jack smiled. "Yeah, and the sitter canceled. And I promised to be quiet like a cat," she added, miming a silent paw step. He tapped her nose gently. "I'll hold you to that." Whitmore Tower felt different when Jack entered with Emma beside him. She clutched his hand, her eyes darting from the gleaming marble floors to the elevator's glass-paneled walls, which revealed a dizzying view of Manhattan rising around them. She looked small under the fluorescent lights, her rainbow-knit hat bobbing with every step. They rode the elevator down to the facility's wing where the hum of machines and the echo of footsteps offered a strange kind of comfort. "This is where you work?" she asked in a whisper. "Yep," Jack said. "It's not glamorous, but it keeps the lights on, literally." Emma giggled, then hugged his arm. "It smells like socks." He laughed, and for a moment the world felt lighter. By mid-morning, Jack was replacing ceiling tiles in the third-floor break room, while Emma sat on a bench nearby, drawing quietly with the crayons he always kept in his backpack just in case. Upstairs, Ava was walking through the corridor with a tablet in hand, reviewing supply budgets, her heels clicking against the polished floors. Her assistant, Kayla, trailed behind, relaying the agenda for the upcoming board meeting. As they turned a corner, Ava stopped abruptly. Through the open door of the break room, she caught a glimpse of a small girl in a purple jacket seated alone, scribbling colorful shapes across printer paper. And sitting beside her, arms deep in a ceiling panel, was Jack. Kayla continued walking, oblivious. Ava stayed. For a moment, she simply watched. She hadn't expected this, hadn't even known Jack had a child. But as she observed the gentle glance he gave Emma every few seconds and the quiet, confident way the girl moved in his orbit, something within her stirred. Emma looked up and saw her. Ava blinked. The child stared at her for a beat, curious but not afraid. Then she lifted her crayon and offered a small wave. Ava, surprised by her own reaction, lifted her fingers in return. "Hi, Emma," mouthed silently. "Hi, Ava," said back her voice barely audible. Jack finally noticed and turned. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between apology and tension. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping down from the ladder. "Our sitter had an emergency. I didn't want to miss work." Ava didn't scold. Instead, she stepped closer, studying Emma, who was now holding up her drawing proudly. "Is this yours?" Ava asked. Emma nodded. "It's a city, but nicer, with no traffic." Jack cleared his throat. "We can head out." "No need," Ava interrupted softly. She turned to Emma. "I like your imagination." Then to Jack, more quietly. "She's beautiful." "How old, 9?" he said, cautious. "She reminds me of someone," Ava murmured. Then she smiled as if catching herself. "Let me know if you need a more private space next time." Jack blinked. "Thank you. That means a lot." She nodded, gave Emma one more warm glance, then turned and left without another word. But the moment lingered. Later that evening, as they walked home through soft flurries of snow, Emma tugged on Jack's sleeve. "Was that lady your boss?" "Yes." "She's pretty," Jack chuckled. "She's also very smart and busy." She looked kind of sad. Emma said, her voice thoughtful. Jack stopped walking. "Sad," he repeated. Emma nodded, like her heart had a Band-Aid on it. Jack didn't respond right away. Instead, he lifted her onto his shoulders and continued down the sidewalk, the wind carrying the scent of roasted peanuts from a street cart nearby. Sometimes, he said, even strong people have parts that still hurt. That night, Ava stood in her penthouse overlooking a city lit in gold and silver. A wine glass sat untouched beside her. On the table was the drawing Emma had left behind. Kayla had retrieved it after they'd gone. A city, with no traffic, a river running through the center, bridges made of flowers. She turned it over. On the back, in blocky handwriting, it read, "For Daddy, because he makes broken things better." Ava stared at it until her eyes blurred. She remembered her father, how he used to fix broken watches, taking them apart and putting them back together without manuals. She remembered how he stopped doing that after her mother left, as if the world had broken in a way he couldn't fix. She'd built everything this company, her reputation, her fortress of solitude, on the belief that no one would catch her if she fell. But someone had, and now she had seen the man who caught her not just in the act of saving a life, but in the act of quietly living for someone else. Emma wasn't just a child. She was his why. And Ava was starting to wonder if she'd ever had one of those for herself. She placed the drawing gently on her desk. Maybe it wasn't just Jack she needed to understand. Maybe it was time to learn what it meant to fix things that weren't machines, like people, like trust, like herself, and maybe like someone else's tomorrow. The storm had returned overnight, cloaking Manhattan in a curtain of snow by morning. But Ava Whitmore didn't notice the weather. She stood in her office, perfectly still, the silence so complete that the faint tick of the antique clock on her bookshelf sounded like a drumbeat in her ear. On her desk, a flash drive lay next to her laptop like a live wire. She had waited nearly 2 weeks for the city's Department of Transportation to release the footage, had pulled strings signed, waivers even met in person with the assistant commissioner. A request like this wasn't common. But then Ava Whitmore was no ordinary citizen. She sat down, inserted the drive, and opened the folder. Her breath caught the moment the file loaded. Timestamp 11:52 p.m. Location FDR Drive near South Street. Weather heavy snow. Camera fixed traffic unit 04-7. She hit play. At first, there was nothing, just the ghostly sheen of headlights flickering through snow and the empty icy road below. Then a flash. A vehicle veered sharply from the left lane, spun, and slammed into the guardrail with a metallic shriek even the mute recording seemed to carry. Her SUV. She watched her own accident unfold like a scene from someone else's nightmare. The next 10 seconds were a void. No movement, no bystanders. The snow thickened. Then, suddenly, there he was. A man running from the shadows, silhouetted by his own headlights. He sprinted to the wreck, yanked at the passenger door. Nothing. He circled to the driver's side, crouched, pried, pulled until the door gave. The man leaned inside, bracing himself against the frame. Ava leaned forward, one hand over her mouth. The angle didn't show his face clearly, but she didn't need it. The posture, the shape, the urgency. It was Jack. He pulled her out slowly, carefully, as if she were made of glass. Then he collapsed onto the snow with her in his arms. His jacket came off, wrapped around her shoulders. He checked her pulse, held her face, murmured something they couldn't hear. Then he stood and left. No ambulance, no police yet. He simply walked away into the night. Ava sat frozen as the screen faded to black. A knock on the glass pulled her from the trance. Kayla stood at the door. "I didn't mean to interrupt. The 10 a.m. was pushed to noon. And Mr. Sloan is asking for, I'll handle him later," Ava said softly. Kayla glanced at the screen, recognized the paused image. Her eyes widened. "Is that?" "Yes." Kayla stepped closer. "You were right. It was him." Ava nodded, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "He never told me." "Why would he?" Ava looked down. "Because he saved my life." Kayla hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Maybe that's exactly why he didn't. That afternoon, Jack was in the mechanical control room tracing a glitch in the security access panel logs. The fluorescent lights above flickered with that peculiar stutter they always did when a snowstorm passed through. He was halfway through testing a relay switch when a voice came from behind. "I see you still fix things yourself." He turned. Ava stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable but far gentler than usual. No tablet, no phone, just her. "I try," Jack said, standing. "What can I help you with?" She stepped inside. "Actually, I came to say something, and I didn't want to do it over email or in a hallway." Jack wiped his hands and waited. "I know it was you," she said. "That night. The crash." He didn't move, didn't deny it, just held her gaze. "I requested the traffic footage," she added. "I needed to see it with my own eyes. And now I have." Jack looked down, exhaled slowly. "I didn't think you'd remember." "I remembered your voice first," she said. "Then your hands. The way you spoke to me. Calm. Like you'd done it before." "I haven't," he said quietly. She nodded. "That's what makes it even more incredible." Silence settled between them like snowfall, gentle but weighted. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. Jack leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "Because you didn't need to know. You were okay. That's all I cared about." Ava studied him, then said, "That's not how people work in this city." Jack gave a half smile. "I guess I missed the memo." She chuckled, soft and unguarded, and for a moment it felt like the air between them warmed. "I owe you my life," Ava said. "And I don't say that lightly. Not just as a woman, but as someone who hasn't needed anyone for a long time." Jack looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. "You don't owe me anything. But if I'm being honest, maybe I needed that night as much as you did." She tilted her head. "Why? Because I'd forgotten what it feels like to make a difference. To matter. That moment. It reminded me." Ava's throat tightened. She stepped closer, voice quiet. "You mattered long before that night, Jack. I just didn't see it." Their eyes locked. The room, the building, the city outside, it all fell away for a breathless second. And though nothing was said aloud, something between them shifted. Recognition. Respect. Something tender. Ava broke the moment with a gentle nod. "There's a corporate event next Friday. Black tie, board members, speeches. Most people will be faking smiles and swapping business cards." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Sounds riveting." She smiled. "I want you to come." He blinked. "Me as my guest," she said. "Not as a favor. Not because of the past. But because maybe it's time the people in that room met someone real." Jack didn't answer right away, but then quietly he said, "I'll think about it." Ava nodded, then turned to leave. And just before stepping through the door, she looked over her shoulder. "Thank you, Jack, for that night, and for not walking away." Then she was gone, and Jack was left standing in the hum of wires and lights, heart pounding not because of what had happened, but because of what might just be beginning. The invitation sat on Jack's kitchen table for 3 days before he even touched it again. Thick, cream-colored cardstock, the Whitmore Industries logo embossed in gold at the top. Below it, annual corporate reception. Whitmore Tower Grand Ballroom. Formal attire required. He turned it over slowly in his hands as Emma ate cereal beside him, her eyes darting between her spoon and her father. "Are you going to go?" Jack looked up. "To what, that fancy party thing?" she said, clearly eavesdropping. "You keep looking at the envelope like it's going to bite you." He chuckled. "You think I'd fit in there?" Emma tilted her head. "Do they have food?" "Probably." "Then yes." He laughed, but there was a weight behind his smile. It wasn't the dress code or the glitz that unsettled him. It was the idea of walking into that room as her guest. That phrase alone invited 100 interpretations, and none of them sat comfortably with him. Because no matter what Ava said or how she looked at him that day in the control room, Jack still felt like a man on the outside of something too polished, too precise, By the time Friday arrived, Jack had made his decision if only because Emma had helped pick out a tie and Mrs. Rivera insisted on ironing his one decent jacket while humming old Sinatra tunes. "You walk into that room with your head high," she said. "The people worth knowing will see who you are. And the rest, they don't matter." He'd nodded, grateful, but a part of him still questioned what Ava really wanted from him. Gratitude. A story. A headline for her board, or something more dangerous connection. The Whitmore ballroom shimmered beneath a canopy of crystal lights and live-string music. Waiters in black ties glided across the floor with silver trays. Industry titans shook hands like they were brokering peace treaties. And at the far end of the room, near a grand staircase, stood Ava Whitmore. She was dressed in a midnight blue gown that was understated but unmistakably elegant. Her hair swept into a soft chignon, her only jewelry a thin silver bracelet that caught the light when she turned her wrist. Yet it wasn't any of that made Jack pause as he entered. It was her eyes. She saw him across the room before anyone else did, and for a moment the noise dulled. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but the warmth in her gaze was undeniable, like she was relieved he came. A junior executive approached Jack quickly. "Sir, can I see your invite?" Jack held it up. The man glanced at it, then at Jack's well-worn jacket and scuffed shoes. His polite smile faltered. "Oh, you're Miss Whitmore's guest." Before Jack could reply, Ava was already at his side. "Jack," she said, voice calm and clear. "Glad you made it." The junior exec paled slightly and backed away. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Was that my first test?" "No," she said, her lips tugging upward. "That comes later." She offered her arm. He hesitated, then took it. The evening blurred into conversation and introductions. Ava moved through the crowd like water fluid, poised, commanding. And Jack, despite himself, found he didn't want to leave her side. Not because he was dazzled by the event, but because next to her he felt seen. Still, not everyone shared Ava's perspective. Across the room, Gregory Sloane watched them with narrowed eyes, his scotch glass tight in his grip. He'd spent the last 2 weeks digging through Jack Carter's file, convinced there was a missing piece. No man got that close to Ava, professionally or personally, without a reason. And tonight, Jack had shown up not just as a guest, but on her arm. Unacceptable. Gregory approached just as Ava stepped away to speak to a board member. Jack stood alone for the first time in an hour, scanning the room. Gregory moved in. "Jack Carter, isn't it?" he asked, tone like a blade wrapped in velvet. Jack nodded. "That's me. Gregory Sloane, COO." He offered his hand. Jack shook it. "I've been meaning to chat," Gregory continued. "You've made quite the impression lately." Jack sensed something cold beneath the civility. "Just doing my job. That's what concerns me." Jack blinked. "Excuse me. You see, we have a culture here. Processes. Protocols. And I find it troubling when someone leaps over all of them and lands in a senior position without so much as a second interview." Jack folded his arms. "I didn't leap anywhere. I was hired." Gregory's voice dropped. "You were selected. By Ava. Personally. That kind of decision carries weight and consequences." There was no threat in the words, and yet it felt like one. Jack didn't flinch. "I didn't ask for special treatment." "No," Gregory said, stepping closer, "but you're standing in a room full of people who think you did." Before Jack could respond, Ava reappeared. "Gregory," she said, eyes flashing. "I see you've met Jack." "We were just chatting," he said smoothly, but Jack could tell she heard the undertone. Ava placed a hand on Jack's arm. "Excuse us?" She led him to the edge of the ballroom near the balcony. The night air filtered in through open doors, crisp and sharp. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "He shouldn't have cornered you." "He's not wrong," Jack said. "People are talking. Wondering why I'm here. Why you brought me." She looked up at him. "Do you wonder?" Jack hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but I wonder if you do." The question hung between them. "I brought you," she said slowly, "because I trust you. Because you remind me of who I wanted to be before all of this." He searched her face, surprised by the vulnerability. "And because," she added, "you're the only person in this room who doesn't want anything from me." Jack exhaled. The wind caught his tie, fluttered it against his chest. "I came because Emma said I should," he admitted. Ava smiled, eyes soft. "Smart girl." They stood in silence for a long moment, side by side, watching the city lights burn beneath them. Not rivals, not strangers, just two people worn but alive on the edge of something neither fully understood yet. And, for the first time, Ava didn't feel like she had to control what came next. She just had to trust it. The Monday after the reception dawned with a clear sky, crisp air, and the distinct chill of judgment lingering beneath polished smiles. Jack arrived earlier than usual, not because he was trying to prove anything, but because he needed to be grounded. After the whirlwind of Friday night of standing beside Ava under chandeliers and scrutiny, the hum of machinery and the metallic scent of tools were a relief. He was halfway through tightening a boiler valve in the sub-basement when Luke found him. "You're officially famous," Luke said, arms crossed, a teasing edge in his voice. Jack looked up. "I assume you're not talking about my pipe work?" Luke handed him a folded copy of the Morning Ledger. On the front page was a photo taken at the Whitmore reception. Ava in her evening gown, Jack beside her slightly turned mid-laugh. The caption read, "The CEO and the Mystery Man." A new power duo at Whitmore. Jack exhaled slowly. "I didn't even see a camera," he muttered. "Doesn't matter," Luke said. "You stood next to Ava Whitmore in front of 24 board members, half the city's business elite, and Gregory Sloane's worst dreams. Someone was bound to snap a photo." Jack handed the paper back. "Let me guess, Gregory's not thrilled." "Thrilled," Luke scoffed. "He's in war mode." Jack's stomach tightened. He had expected gossip, but not headlines. Upstairs, Ava sat at the head of the conference table in the executive boardroom. The temperature in the room was cold, though the heating system worked just fine. Around her sat a collection of men in tailored suits and calculated frowns. Gregory Sloane paced at the end of the room, arms folded, voice low but cutting. "I have to ask Ava, what exactly are we doing?" Ava looked up from her tablet, calm and composed. "Clarify your question. You brought a maintenance technician to a black tie board event," Gregory said. "You gave him access to our executive tier. Now we're on page 1 of the ledger like we're filming a soap opera." A board member spoke up. "The investors are calling. They want to know if there's a personal entanglement that compromises judgment." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Are we really pretending that male executives haven't brought personal guests to that same event for years?" Jack wore a tie. He didn't ask for a spotlight. "But you gave him one," Gregory snapped. Silence. Then Ava leaned forward, her voice even but steely. "You're all missing the point. You're looking at optics headlines. I'm looking at integrity. That man Jack Carter pulled me out of a burning car and walked away without telling a soul. He works harder than half the people on this floor. He doesn't network. He doesn't manipulate. And that scares you because it's the one thing you can't control." Several men shifted in their seats. Gregory's jaw flexed. "He doesn't belong here." Ava's voice was razor sharp. "Then maybe we need to reconsider who does." Down in the facility corridor, Jack was checking heat differentials in the core HVAC system when his employee badge suddenly failed to open the next sector door. He tried again. Nothing. Frowning, he called up the building's access panel. His clearance had been revoked. Before he could react, Luke came jogging up the hallway. "They pulled your security," Luke said, breath short. It came from upstairs. Orders from Sloane's office. Something about a temporary review. Jack's jaw clenched. "So I'm being iced out." "They didn't even notify you?" Luke asked. Jack shook his head. "No, of course not." By noon, Jack had packed his tools and was sitting in the back stairwell with a lukewarm coffee trying to make sense of the last 72 hours. He had never asked to be elevated, never expected invitations, headlines, or receptions. All he'd done was tell the truth and do his job. And now it seemed that was too threatening for people like Gregory Sloane. A knock on the metal door pulled him from his thoughts. Ava stepped inside, coat still buttoned from an outside meeting. She looked tired but fierce. "I just came from the board," she said, voice calm but heavy. "They're circling." Jack rose to his feet. "I figured. They've suspended your system access pending a re-evaluation of internal structure." "It's not a termination." "Yet." Jack's brow furrowed. "You can override it." "I did. Twice." Sloane reinstated the lock. "He's manipulating procedure." "I don't want you to fight for me," Jack said gently but firmly. "This isn't your battle." "It is," Ava said. "Because I brought you into this mess. Because this company needs men like you more than it needs 10 Gregory Sloanes." Jack shook his head. "I don't belong in the middle of a corporate power game, Ava. I'm not built for politics. I'm built for boilers and wiring and Emma." She stepped closer. "That's why you belong. Because you know why you're here. And I'm not asking you to play a game. I'm asking you not to walk away from something that matters." Jack's voice dropped. "Do you really believe I'm the one being tested here?" Ava didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "Maybe we both are." They stood in silence, tension and tenderness swirling between them like storm winds against glass. Then Ava reached into her coat and handed him a sealed envelope. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting on Friday. I want you there." Jack hesitated. "Why?" "Because I'm not going to defend your presence behind closed doors anymore," she said. "If they want answers, they can hear them from you." He opened the envelope. Inside was a formal summons with his name on it. Jack looked at her quiet and steady. "I don't like attention," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why they need to hear your voice." That night, Jack returned home to find Emma asleep on the couch with her rabbit tucked under her chin and a drawing on the table. It was a picture of him in a suit standing in front of a tall building with stars drawn above his head. In crayon, she had written, "You're a hero, Daddy," even if nobody knows it yet. Jack sat beside her, stared at the drawing for a long time, and whispered, "They're about to." Friday morning arrived wrapped in silence. Jack stood in front of the mirror buttoning the collar of the same dress shirt he wore to the interview weeks ago. It had been ironed again, this time by Mrs. Rivera, who'd said nothing but patted his arm and left a folded note inside his jacket pocket. The truth doesn't need permission. Emma peeked from the bedroom doorway, hugging her rabbit. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Jack turned to her and nodded. "A little." She stepped closer, slipping something into his hand. A small folded square of paper with a drawing of him stick figure toolbox in one hand, a glowing star above his head. "Heroes don't have to yell," she whispered. Jack swallowed hard and hugged her tight. At Whitmore Tower, the air on the 30th floor was razor thin. Ava sat at the head of the long mahogany table, every board member in place, their expressions carefully curated into neutrality. The walls were glass, the city stretching out behind them like a silent jury. Gregory Sloane sat directly opposite Ava, fingers steepled, a faint smirk playing on his lips. His message had been clear all week. "You brought him in. Now let's see you defend him." Ava stood as Jack entered. No suit. Just a button-down, clean jeans, boots polished as best he could. He looked out of place in the room, but somehow also the most grounded person there. Ava gestured to the seat beside her. Mr. Carter said Gregory without looking up. "This isn't a disciplinary hearing, to be clear. This is simply a clarification of roles, ensuring we're aligned on company culture and expectations." Jack took his seat calmly. "Happy to clarify." A chuckle rose from the far end of the table. "You certainly made an impression." Gregory leaned forward. "The concern, frankly, is influence. Optics. A senior employee being fast-tracked under executive favor raises questions." Jack met his gaze evenly. "I was hired after one interview because your CEO saw something in me. Not because I asked for anything. I've shown up. I've worked. I've kept my head down. If that's what bothers you, I don't think I'm the one with something to explain." A few brows lifted. One board member scribbled something in her notebook. "Let's be honest," Mr. Carter said. "Gregory, you were the man in the photo." That image suggested closeness, not professionalism. Jack sat forward. "You want to talk about the photo? Fine, but let's talk about the moment before it was taken." He looked at each person around the table. "She invited me because I saved her life. On a street in the snow when nobody else stopped. I didn't know her name. I didn't know who she was. I didn't care. I did it because I believe in doing what's right even when nobody's watching." A hush fell over the room. "I didn't tell anyone. I didn't use it to get a job or leverage or favors. I came here because I need work. I have a daughter. I fix things pipes, wiring, machines. It's what I do." He paused. "But I think you're afraid I might fix something else. Something deeper. Like how we treat people who can't talk their way into rooms like this." Ava didn't move, but her chest rose with a slow breath. Gregory narrowed his eyes. "You're implying we're broken." Jack stood. "I'm not implying anything. I'm saying that when leadership stops recognizing integrity just because it comes in a worn jacket instead of a tailored suit, then yes, something's broken." No one interrupted him. "And if what makes someone a threat here is not wanting anything but to do the job well, then maybe I'm in the wrong place." He turned to Ava. "Unless I'm not." She looked up at him steady. "You're not." Jack nodded once. "Then you'll know where to find me." He walked toward the door, his steps even. For a moment it felt like no one breathed. Just before exiting, Jack turned back. "For what it's worth," he added, voice quieter now, "I don't belong here to make noise. I'm here to make sure when people turn on the lights they stay on." Then he left. Silence held the boardroom in a suspended state. Then a woman from the far end of the table, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, spoke. "I've been on this board 22 years, she said. "That's the first time anyone in this room reminded me why we exist." Several others nodded slowly. Gregory looked shaken but forced a smile. "Well, perhaps that's enough drama for one morning." "No," Ava said, rising to her feet. "Not yet." She faced them all standing tall. "Jack Carter is not a symbol. He's not a headline. He's a reminder that we've strayed too far from the people who make this company run." She glanced around. Today isn't about Jack proving he belongs. It's about us proving we deserve to keep him. Then, without waiting for consensus, she collected her files. Meeting adjourned. That evening, Jack returned home exhausted but lighter. Emma greeted him at the door with her newest drawing, a tower glowing with stars and a small figure in a hard hat at the base. "This is your building now," she said proudly, "because you're the one who keeps the lights on." Jack knelt and pulled her into his arms. Maybe she was right. Maybe all along what made someone belong wasn't who they knew or what they wore, but what they stood for. And today, he had stood. For something. For himself. For everyone like him. And the light stayed on. The sun poured into Ava's office through tall windows, casting long golden stripes across the polished floor. It was the first truly warm morning of the year, the kind of light that made glass buildings feel like greenhouses and reminded people there was still life outside quarterly reports. But Ava Whitmore felt nothing of it. She sat at her desk, the boardroom transcript open in front of her fingers, laced under her chin. The room was quiet, too quiet. Even the ever-present buzz of Kayla's typing outside the glass wall was absent. In truth, she was waiting. She'd dismissed her entire morning schedule. She needed space. Not to make a decision she already had, but to feel the full weight of it before she acted. Downstairs, Jack was back in the boiler room, wrench in hand, repairing a broken valve he could have fixed in his sleep. But his hands worked more slowly today. Not from hesitation, but reflection. The boardroom confrontation had been 3 days ago, and still the tension lingered in the walls. People looked at him differently now, some with respect, others with wariness, and a few with something closer to resentment. But what mattered most was that he looked at himself differently. He had stood his ground, and, surprisingly, the world hadn't fallen apart. Yet he couldn't shake the sense that Ava was still fighting battles he hadn't been invited to see. And maybe that was about to change. Ava finally rose from her chair and walked to the window. Below, the city was moving brisk, oblivious, alive. She thought about everything that had brought her here, the accident, the fire, the rescue, the quiet man who had slipped away without expecting anything, and then walked back into her life through a door she hadn't even known she'd left open. For years, she had told herself leadership meant solitude, distance, iron discipline. But Jack had reminded her of something else, that integrity had nothing to do with power and loyalty didn't have to be bought. She reached for the folder on her desk. Inside it was the proposal for a new corporate initiative, something Jack had unknowingly inspired. A partnership between Whitmore Industries and the city's underfunded trade schools. Technical apprenticeships, paid internships, real pathways for people like Jack and the many others who wouldn't otherwise be seen. She'd named the initiative the Second Light Program, because Jack hadn't just turned on a switch in her building. He'd turned one on inside her. Later that afternoon, Ava appeared in the facility's office without warning. Jack looked up from his workbench, surprised. "You're early," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "I canceled my meetings," she said. "Needed to see someone who doesn't pretend for a living." He chuckled. "You'll get me in trouble with your PR team." She handed him a folder. "I want you to read this." He opened it, scanned the first page, then looked up sharply. "This is your idea." "It's yours," she said. "You just didn't pitch it." He flipped the page, absorbing details. Vocational partnerships, full healthcare coverage for entry-level roles, a mentorship program. "I want you to head it," Ava added. "You'd stay in facilities, but with an expanded title, Director of Infrastructure Development. Full authority to build the program from the ground up." Jack stared at her, stunned. "You're serious?" "As a rebuilt firewall," she replied. He didn't laugh. Not yet. Instead, he set the folder down and looked at her closely. "Why me? Because this company needs a moral compass, and because I trust you more than I trust anyone on the 31st floor." Jack was quiet for a long beat. Then, "You're going to take heat for this. I already have," she said, "but some choices you make for survival, others for legacy." Jack exhaled. "You really think I can do this? I don't promote people because of their resumes," she said softly. "I promote them because of what they do when no one's watching." His gaze softened. "And this," she added, her voice quieter now, "isn't about repaying a debt. It's about building something better. Together." The word lingered in the air. Together. Not just as colleagues. Not just as leaders. But as people who had walked through fire in different ways and had chosen not to be hardened by it. That evening, Jack and Emma took a walk through Central Park. Spring was peeking through the ground patches of green shy crocuses and puddles that reflected the sky. Emma skipped ahead, arms wide. "Daddy, watch me fly," Jack smiled. "You already are." He'd told her about the new job, about how things might change, more meetings, more responsibilities, but also more chances to help people who needed someone to believe in them. "Will I still get to see you in the morning?" she had asked. "You'll always see me," he said. Maybe not always in boots and tools, but always. Now walking behind her, he saw the future more clearly than he ever had. Not just a better paycheck, not just restored dignity, but the power to build something lasting for her and for all the kids like her whose parents were trying to hold on with scraped knuckles and quiet courage. Back in her penthouse, Ava watched the city lights flicker to life. Across the street, in another high-rise, someone was replacing a bulb on a rooftop sign. She smiled. The lights stayed on, because someone like Jack was still out there, fixing things no one noticed, and, finally, being seen. It was after hours at Whitmore Tower, the city below softened by twilight, and the building itself unusually quiet, almost reverent. The hum of conversation, the clack of heels, the buzz of conference calls all had faded into a peaceful stillness as if the tower were taking a breath at the end of a long day. On the 32nd floor in the executive wing, Ava rarely used, one office remained lit. Jack stood inside, sleeves rolled up, a notepad in one hand, the other resting lightly on a scale model of the new training center he was designing. On his laptop screen, a spreadsheet of budget projections shared space with a childlike drawing tacked to the corner, a stick figure holding a light bulb smiling under a caption in block letters, "My dad fixes the world." He smiled softly. Still here came a voice behind him. He turned. Ava leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed but relaxed. She wasn't in her usual suit. Instead, she wore a soft navy sweater and jeans, her hair loose, face unguarded. For the first time, she looked less like a CEO and more like Ava. Jack nodded. Couldn't sleep. "The electricians are finalizing specs on the Bronx site. We break ground next month." "I know," she said. "I approved the final permits this morning." He set the pad down. "You're here late." "So are you." He gave a small chuckle. "I guess we're both bad at leaving things unfinished." Ava stepped into the room and walked toward the window. The skyline stretched out before them, lit with 1,000 warm lights. Below, cars moved like veins through the city's circulatory system, constant, driven alive. "This place looks different at night," she said. Jack joined her at the glass. "It always does. That's when you notice what's really lit and what's just pretending." She glanced at him, thoughtful. "Funny how many things we passed by without ever really seeing." He nodded. "Until they break." They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching the city breathe. Then Ava spoke again, softer now. "I've spent most of my career building walls so nothing could touch me. I thought it made me strong. It made you survive," Jack said gently. She looked at him. "And then you showed up. Quiet. No ask. No agenda. Just hands that helped. A voice that calmed. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. You reminded me that strength isn't about how much you carry, it's about who you carry it for." Jack swallowed hard. "I carried you out of that car. But you gave me a reason to keep walking." A long pause. Then Ava reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. She opened her palm. Jack blinked. His old scarf. "You never came back for it," she said, smiling. He laughed softly, taking it from her. "I thought it was lost." She met his eyes. It wasn't. A week later, the city gathered for the ribbon cutting of the Second Light Training Center, a sprawling, modern space in the Bronx where veterans, single parents, immigrants, and trade school graduates would learn from experienced technicians and gain pathways into careers like Jack's. Ava gave the opening remarks. But Jack delivered the speech everyone remembered. He stood before a crowd of students, board members, donors, and media, with Emma, perched in the front row, legs crossed and proud. He didn't speak from a teleprompter. He spoke from his life. "I never thought I'd stand behind a microphone," he began. "But I've stood behind broken panels, busted boilers, and lights that refuse to turn on. And I've learned that the most important thing isn't knowing how to fix something. It's believing that fixing it is worth the effort. When people are given the tools, the time, and someone who sees their potential, they rise. This center isn't about charity. It's about opportunity. The woman who helped build this with me, she gave me a second light. And now we want to pass that light forward." The applause rose warm and sincere, and Emma clapped loudest. Afterward, as cameras clicked and people shook hands, Ava found Jack beneath a simple overhead lamp on the center's main floor. "It worked," she said. Jack smiled. "Yeah, and the lights stayed on." That night, the two of them sat on the center's rooftop garden, the city pulsing below them. Emma had fallen asleep inside on a beanbag, a book open in her lap. The stars above peeked through the haze of light pollution, faint but persistent. Jack leaned back, hands behind his head. "I used to think the world didn't need men like me," he said quietly, "that we were invisible, disposable." "You're not," Ava said. I know that now. She looked at him. What changed? He turned to her. You didn't walk away. For a long moment they simply sat in that truth. Then Ava took his hand, threading her fingers with his. Not urgently, not possessively, just surely. I think she whispered, "This is how healing begins." He nodded, eyes on the distant glow of downtown. "And how stories begin," he added. "No," she said, resting her head on his shoulder, "how the right ones continue." Months later, Emma placed a framed photo on her nightstand. It was of her dad and Ava in hard hats standing under a newly lit sign, Second Light Training Center. She turned off her lamp and whispered, "Good night, world." And in the darkness, the building across the city blinked back. The light was still on, because someone chose to stay, and someone else finally chose to let him in. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below, and let us know what part of the story moved you the most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another tale that brings warmth, hope, and a little light to your day. Thank you so much for watching. We're truly grateful to have you here. A struggling single dad got a midnight call by mistake. But she said, "I needed you more than ever." The rain had come in sideways all evening, pounding the tin roof of the modest bungalow like an angry drummer. Liam Carter wiped his boots on the mat just inside the door and quietly locked it behind him. The clock above the mantel read 12:01 a.m. The living room was dim lit only by the soft glow of a vintage floor lamp and the flickering television screen now playing static. Emma had fallen asleep on the sofa, picture book still open in her lap, her cheeks flushed with sleep. He walked over, gently adjusted the blanket around her, and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred, but didn't wake. Liam paused there for a moment, watching her. She was the reason he kept going, the reason he kept breathing. He'd worked a double shift patching an emergency boiler leak in a rundown apartment block where the heating had failed. His fingers were cracked and raw from the cold, the tips still stained with rust and sealant. But it wasn't the work that tired him. It was the silence. The silence that used to be filled with laughter, with her voice. He reached for his phone, which sat charging on the kitchen counter. One missed call from a number he didn't recognize. He frowned. Wrong number, maybe. Then it rang again. Liam stared at the screen. Unknown number. The digital clock on the microwave read 12:04 a.m. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to ignore it. Nothing good ever came from a midnight call. But something in the timing and the strange stillness of the room made his hand move. He answered. There was silence, and then a soft breath. Fragile. Unstable. A woman's voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call. I know I shouldn't." Liam blinked, confused. "It's all right. Who is this?" Another pause. Her voice was trembling now, raw and full of something he hadn't heard in a long time, desperation. "I thought I dialed someone else. I just needed to hear someone's voice. I'm sorry." He could have ended it there. Could have said goodnight and hung up. But something in her tone caught him by the throat. A note of something brittle, like glass about to shatter. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She didn't answer, just let out a shaky breath. "I'm not okay," she whispered. "I'm not okay, and I don't know how to fix it anymore." Liam's breath caught. The room around him felt suddenly smaller. "You don't have to fix it all tonight," he said. "You just have to make it through tonight." There was silence, but she didn't hang up. "Where are you?" he asked. She gave a choked laugh. "I'm not going to jump off a building if that's what you're asking." He sat down at the kitchen table, his back aching. "That's not what I asked." She paused, and for the first time her voice steadied just barely. "I'm sitting in my car. I left a party. Everyone was laughing. I felt like I was watching strangers through glass. So I walked out." "You called the wrong number," he said quietly. Maybe she murmured. Or maybe I didn't. The rain continued tapping on the windows. Emma stirred again in her sleep, murmuring something inaudible. Liam glanced over and smiled just barely. Then his attention returned to the line. "I don't know who you are," she continued, "but your voice, it's calm, like you're someone who's used to holding things together when they're falling apart." He let that hang there for a moment. Then he said softly, "I lost someone. A long time ago. I learned how to sound steady. Doesn't mean I am." There was a soft sound, something like a sob, trying to stay hidden. "I don't want to go home tonight," she whispered. "Everything there reminds me I'm not enough. That I failed." Liam leaned forward, resting his elbow on the table, eyes fixed on nothing. "Whoever told you that lied," he said. "How would you know? Because I've been there. And the truth is, the only people who say you're not enough are the ones who fear they never were." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Liam." Another pause. "I'm Sophie." They didn't say anything else for a while, just listened to the sound of each other's breathing. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt held. Eventually, she said, "Thank you, Liam, for answering." And then, without warning, the call disconnected. Liam stared at the phone. His own reflection blinked back at him in the dark screen. He sat there a long time. Then he rose, walked over to the sofa, and kissed Emma's forehead. "Good night, baby girl," he whispered. And in the quiet, where once there had been nothing, there was now a name. Sophie, and a voice he couldn't forget. Liam didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch across from his daughter, staring at the ceiling as the old radiator hummed quietly in the background. Outside, the rain had turned to a light mist drifting through the porch light like breath on a winter window pane. Sophie. That was all he had. A name, a voice, and 1,000 silent questions. He didn't know what she looked like. Didn't know where she lived, what she did for a living, or what had driven her to make that call. But none of it mattered. What stayed with him wasn't the details. It was the weight in her voice, the ache buried in every syllable. He knew that ache. He'd carried it himself. By morning, Emma was back to her bright-eyed self. She bounced around the kitchen in her pajamas, requesting blueberry pancakes with exactly 3 chocolate chips per side, a Carter family tradition. Liam, bleary-eyed but smiling, obliged. "Did you dream last night?" she asked, climbing into the chair across from him. He poured the batter and glanced at her. "Yeah, I think I did." "What about a woman in the dark?" he said, then paused, and a voice I couldn't forget. Emma tilted her head in that curious way she did when she was trying to understand something beyond her years. "Did she say something scary?" Liam flipped a pancake, letting the thought hang in the air. "No," he said softly. "She said something honest." That evening, after Liam tucked Emma into bed and turned out the light, he sat on the porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, listening to the quiet. The moon hung low, casting silver across the cracked pavement of the street below. The town was winding down, lights flicking off in windows, cars pulling into driveways. His phone buzzed just as he was about to set it down. Unknown number, 12:03 a.m. His heart thudded. For a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail, but he didn't. He swiped to answer. "Hello." There was silence, then a breath. "It's me again," she said, her voice low and cautious. "I know I shouldn't have called. I couldn't stop thinking about last night." He exhaled slowly. "Neither could I." A pause. Then, quieter, "I thought you wouldn't answer." "I wasn't sure I would," Liam admitted, "but I'm glad I did." She let out a small, almost nervous laugh. "Me too." This time she didn't sound quite so broken. Still brittle, still guarded, but not splintering. There was a sliver of something in her tone. Hope, maybe. Or gratitude. They talked for 20 minutes. Not about anything profound, just little things. favorite foods, books they'd once loved, songs they secretly cried to in the car. She still didn't offer her last name or where she lived. And Liam didn't ask. Her identity wasn't the point. It was the connection that mattered. Over the next week, the calls became routine. Always at 12:04. Always just her voice and his. He came to expect it like the way dawn eventually follows night. No texting, no social media, no pictures. Just real-time, honest conversations that existed nowhere but in the space between them. Some nights were quiet, their words as sparse as stars. Other nights she cried, and he listened. He never tried to fix her. That was the key. He never offered solutions or platitudes. He didn't ask her to cheer up or stay strong. He just gave her space. And in that space, she breathed. "I'm not used to this," she said one night. "Being heard." Liam was quiet. "You're not invisible. I feel it." "Well, you're not. Not to me." Silence. Then she asked softly, "Do you ever miss her?" It was the first time she brought up his pain. He didn't hesitate. "Every day." Sophie exhaled. "How do you keep going?" Liam looked at the stars overhead. "I don't. Some days I stop. But then Emma needs breakfast, or her shoelace breaks, or she wants to know why the moon follows our car." She laughed. "Kids. Built-in purpose. Something like that." She was quiet for a long moment. Then said almost like a prayer, "I wish someone like you had answered my call a year ago." That same night, as Liam hung up and set the phone down, Gail, the elderly neighbor from next door, stepped out onto her porch wrapped in a thick robe and slippers. "You're out late," she called. Liam smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep." She squinted. "You've been smiling more lately. Less haunted." He blinked, surprised. "Have I?" Gail stepped down one step. Arms folded. "Don't let it scare you. Healing can feel like betrayal when grief is all you've known." Liam's throat tightened. "It's not like that." "I didn't say it was," she said gently. "I'm just saying. It's okay. Even the quietest hearts deserve to be heard." He looked down at the phone, still glowing faintly in his palm. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know who she was or what this would become, but something inside him had changed. He didn't feel numb anymore. He felt present. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. Sophie Bennett did not believe in fate. She believed in data. In performance metrics, quarterly reports, market shifts. That's how she had built an empire, by outworking, outlasting, and outsmarting. Feelings had always been an obstacle to strategy. Vulnerability was for people who had time to fall apart. And yet ever since the first night she accidentally called him Liam, her world had begun to tilt in quiet, undeniable ways. She'd begun taking the long way home just to clear her head. She started drinking her tea without distraction, no longer drowning her thoughts in back-to-back conference calls. And worst of all, most dangerously of all, she found herself waiting for midnight. Waiting for his voice. That warm, grounded voice that never asked for anything. That never interrupted. That made her feel for the first time in years like she wasn't some malfunctioning machine. She felt like a person. Friday came heavy with clouds and an edge of frost in the air. Sophie arrived early at Bennett Media's downtown headquarters, a 20-story glass tower in the heart of the city. Her heels echoed against the marble lobby floor as she entered, nodding briefly at the security guard who greeted her like always. But nothing felt like always anymore. She walked with practiced confidence into the elevator, pressed the button for the executive floor, and stared at her reflection in the polished doors. Hair perfect. Lipstick unflawed. Not a line out of place. And yet she looked unfamiliar. Like someone pretending to be herself. The elevator stopped one floor early. The doors slid open and he was there. At first, Sophie didn't register him. Just another maintenance tech in a navy blue uniform toolbox and hand eyes scanning the wiring in the hallway junction box. Then their eyes met. Liam straightened slightly, his posture instinctively respectful. She was, after all, the CEO. But something flickered across his face. Something subtle. Recognition. Or maybe curiosity. Sophie's breath hitched. Her mind reeled. Could it be? He looked exactly like she had imagined. Not in appearance, but in presence. Solid. Calm. Not particularly polished, but real. Like a man who knew the weight of things and carried them anyway. She forced herself to step inside the elevator without hesitation, her heart suddenly racing. The doors closed. She stared at the panel. At the button for floor 20. But she didn't move. That was him. She knew it. But that couldn't be. Could it? That night, 12:04, came and went. No call. Liam sat on the edge of his bedphone, in hand-thumb hovering over the screen. But he didn't call her. He'd seen her today. He was sure of it. The woman in the navy pantsuit, the CEO, Sophie. She hadn't said anything, but he'd seen the flicker in her eyes. She'd recognized him, too. Maybe not fully, but enough to cause tension in the air between them. Now he wasn't sure what to do. For weeks he'd known her only as a voice, a feeling, a shared silence in the dark. But now she was real, tangible. A woman with influence and power, and let's be honest, an entire life far removed from his. What was he supposed to say to her now? "Hey, it's me, the guy from your midnight emotional unravelings. I was just fixing your building's lighting." He rubbed a hand over his face and sighed. Maybe this was the part where things broke. Maybe it was always meant to be anonymous, a brief rescue mission for two drifting souls, nothing more. Sophie sat in her luxury apartment light's dim glass of wine untouched beside her. Her phone rested on the coffee table like a loaded gun. She hated this feeling. Powerless, exposed. Like someone had peeled back her armor and she couldn't put it back on. Why hadn't he called? Was he scared? Embarrassed worse, was he disappointed? She stood abruptly, pacing the room, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then, without giving herself time to second-guess, she reached for her phone. 12:22 a.m. She called. It rang once, then again. "Hello?" His voice was quiet, cautious. "It's me," she said. "I didn't think you were going to call tonight. I wasn't sure you'd want me to." Silence stretched. "You saw me," she said, more statement than question. "I think so," he replied. "Did you?" "I did." Another pause. And now he asked. Sophie closed her eyes. "Now I don't know how to pretend I don't know your face." Liam exhaled. "It changes things." "Yes," she said. Then added, voice trembling slightly, "But I don't know if that's bad." Liam leaned back against the headboard, feeling something shift in his chest. Something open. "I liked not knowing," he admitted. It made everything feel simpler. "I didn't," she said, "because now that I've seen you, I can't stop wondering if you'd still listen the same way knowing who I am." "I would," he said immediately. "I'd listen harder." That silenced her. Then, softly, "I didn't expect someone like you to be standing in my hallway. You seemed too kind for this world." He chuckled. "Kind doesn't pay rent." She laughed. It was short, but genuine. "No, but maybe it saves people." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You looked strong today. In control." "That's the mask," she replied. "The voice you hear at night, that's the real me. The one I try to bury in daylight." Liam's voice was steady. "Then let's keep meeting at midnight, where the masks can fall." Sophie closed her eyes. "I'd like that." They didn't speak much more after that, but both slept easier than they had in years. The following Monday arrived with the sharpness of winter returning. The air was crisp, the streets glistened with the residue of frost, and Liam found himself staring longer than usual at his reflection in the side mirror of his van before heading into work. He was scheduled for an early job routine maintenance on electrical junctions inside Bennett Media's corporate offices. Just like last week. Just like when he'd seen her. Her, Sophie. He hadn't spoken her name aloud since that last call. He wasn't sure what came next, if anything should. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. Not just her voice, but her poise. The way her eyes had locked with his for that split second. There had been recognition there, a flash of unease, or maybe curiosity. He couldn't tell. Liam had always been good at keeping things separate, compartmentalized. His grief in one boxwork and another fatherhood in its own sacred drawer. But Sophie, she'd slipped past all that. Somehow she'd become real in his world, and now nothing was neat anymore. Up on the 20th floor, Sophie was in her glass-walled office, staring blankly at her laptop. The numbers on the spreadsheet before her might as well have been hieroglyphs. Her assistant knocked lightly and entered without waiting. "Ms. Bennett, the tech, is here to check the electricals on the west wing. Do you want him escorted?" Sophie blinked. "Is it the same guy as last week? I believe so." Liam Carter. Her breath caught in her throat. She covered it with a cough. No need to escort. Let him work. She waited until her assistant left before standing and walking slowly to the window. From there, she could see part of the hallway beyond the frosted glass. She watched the door across the floor open. Watched him step in. Same worn toolbox. Same calm gait. Same slight tilt of his shoulders as he scanned the panels on the wall. She didn't approach. She couldn't. Not yet. That night, Liam tucked Emma into bed, and as he turned off her nightlight, she spoke through a sleepy yawn. "Did you talk to your lady friend today?" He chuckled softly. "What makes you think she's my lady friend?" Emma sat up on one elbow, her curls tousled. "You smile when her name is on your phone." Liam paused. He hadn't realized he'd smiled. Not in a long time. "She's not exactly a friend," he said slowly. "We just talk." "Then maybe you should make her one," Emma mumbled, sinking back into the covers. "Friends make people feel better, like how Mrs. Gale gives us cookies when you look tired." He laughed, walked over and kissed her forehead. "I'll think about it." When 12:04 arrived, Liam was already holding his phone. It didn't ring. At 12:05, he gave in and called her. It rang 3 times. "Hello." Her voice was breathless, not out of surprise, but anticipation. "I wasn't sure if you'd call," she said. "I wasn't sure if you wanted me to." "I waited," she whispered, "but I was afraid. I don't know what to say now that we've seen each other." "You don't have to say anything." "Yes, I do," Sophie said. "I need to explain." Liam sat down the line between them, stretching with tension. "I've never called a stranger before," she began. "Never opened myself up like that. But I was breaking. And then your voice." She paused. It felt like the only real thing I'd touched in months. He stayed quiet, letting her speak. "And now I know who you are, what you do, where you stand when you're not just a voice in the dark." He took a breath. "And I don't know how to handle that," she said honestly. "You're grounded, steady, and I feel like I'm one crisis away from shattering in public. You think I don't feel the same." Liam's voice was calm but edged with emotion. "You think I haven't had to hold my daughter in one hand and my sanity in the other." The line was silent. I wasn't trying to pretend, he continued. I just didn't want to ruin what we had by dragging it into daylight. Sophie's voice softened. "Maybe we're just scared that something good can't survive outside the dark." Liam let that sink in. Then he said, "I'd still listen. Whether you were a CEO or a stranger in the night, I'd still care." A shaky exhale. "Why?" "Because you never asked me to be anything but human. And that's a rare gift." There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to be anyone else anymore, Liam." "Then don't," he said. "Let the mask fall. I'll still be here." The next morning, Sophie walked into her building, passed through the lobby like she always had, but this time her gaze flicked toward the maintenance desk. He wasn't there, and for the first time in weeks, she missed him in daylight. That same morning, Liam found a note tucked under his toolbox in the garage, hand-delivered by courier. It read, I've decided not to run anymore. If you're ever ready to meet me under the sun, I'll be in the lobby. No mask, no name. Just me. S. He stared at the paper heart pounding not out of fear but anticipation. For the first time in years, someone wasn't walking away from the broken parts of him. They were walking toward them. The lobby of Bennett Media was a cathedral of glass and steel shiny surfaces, high ceilings, and cold air conditioning that hummed like distant wind. Sophie stood near the large, curved window facing the street, dressed not in her usual blazer, but in a soft, cream sweater and jeans. Casual, unassuming, like someone trying for once to just be enough. The receptionists gave her curious glances. She never loitered. She never arrived without a meeting. She ignored them. She was waiting. The seconds ticked past noon, and for a moment doubt crept in like a cold draft. Maybe he wouldn't come. Maybe she'd ruined something that had only worked because it wasn't real. Then the front doors slid open. Liam stepped inside, toolbox in hand, wearing his standard navy workshirt sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. His boots tracked melted snow behind him, and his hair was still damp from the wind outside. Their eyes locked. Everything else vanished. No marble, no glass, no cold. Just the two of them, one woman shedding the weight of control, and one man carrying the quiet strength of survival. Liam slowed his pace but didn't stop. Sophie stepped forward. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He returned a small, cautious smile breaking across his face. "You came. You asked." They stood awkwardly for a moment, surrounded by a world that didn't quite know what to do with them now that they'd stepped into it together. Sophie took a breath. "I don't know what this is. Or what it's supposed to be. Me neither. But I don't want to go back to pretending," she said. "Not after everything we shared in the dark." Liam nodded. "We don't have to pretend. But we can take it slow." She smiled. "Slow's good." Just then the elevator dinged behind them and broke the moment. Liam glanced toward the sound. "I have a maintenance call on 16. Sophie gestured toward the cafe off the lobby. "Then, maybe. After I'll be here. No mask. Still me." He tilted his head slightly. "That's the version I like." And then he left, simple as that, but something in her chest felt profoundly changed. She didn't feel alone. Not anymore. That night, 12:04 came and went. No call, but neither of them reached for their phone. Some things were no longer needed in the dark. The next day, a soft knock echoed on Sophie's office door. Her assistant popped in. "Ms. Bennett, there's a little girl here asking for you. She says she knows your name from bedtime stories." Sophie blinked. "What?" Before she could ask more, a small figure slipped past the doorframe. "Hi," said Emma Carter, a burst of energy wrapped in a lavender parka and glittered sneakers. She clutched a paper envelope crinkled at the corners and beamed up at Sophie like they'd been pen pals for years. Sophie stepped out from behind her desk. "Emma." "My dad didn't know I was doing this," Emma said conspiratorially. "I asked Mrs. Gale to walk me here after school. She knows you're nice." Well, thank you. That's very brave of you." Emma held out the envelope. "I wrote something. For you." Sophie took it gently and opened it. Inside was a drawing in crayon stick figures, one taller with brown scribbles for hair, another with wavy lines and high heels, and a little girl in the middle holding both their hands. Above it was a big blue sky, and in uneven letters, "I think we all need stars, even grown-ups." Sophie's breath caught. Emma looked up at her, eyes wide and sincere. "You helped my dad smile again. I thought maybe he helped you too." Sophie knelt slowly. "He did, Emma. He really did." "Then maybe you shouldn't just talk at night," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Maybe you should go look at stars for real. With him." Sophie laughed softly, blinking away the sting behind her eyes. "You're wise for someone who still eats cereal with marshmallows." Emma grinned. "Daddy says I get it from Mom, but I think I just watch people." Sophie reached out, brushing a curl behind the girl's ear. You're going to be something special, Emma. You already are. Emma shrugged. You are too. You just forgot. That evening, Liam opened the front door to find Gail holding Emma's hand, a knowing smile on her face. Before you say anything, yes, I walked her safely, and yes, I had permission from her teacher. Emma skipped into the house as if she hadn't just given a corporate CEO an emotional epiphany. Gail leaned in, eyes twinkling. She drew Sophie a picture, said it needed to be done. Liam exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. Did she? She did. And I have to say, your kid's got taste. That woman looked like someone who could run the world, but just needed a reason to slow down. He laughed, shaking his head. She's something. So are you, Gail said. Don't let your past trick you into thinking you can't be part of something new. He didn't answer, but he looked toward the kitchen where Emma was humming and setting the table for two, and he thought, just maybe the old woman was right. Later that night, Liam received a text. It wasn't from an unknown number. Sophie, your daughter thinks we need to look at the stars. Want to take her advice? Liam stared at the screen, heart pounding softly in his chest. Not fear this time, but hope. He typed back, Liam, only if you promise to show up as you. No masks, just the woman I've been waiting to meet. They met under the stars 2 nights later. Not at a fancy rooftop or candlelit patio, but in Liam's modest backyard where a rickety lawn chair and a wool blanket became their corner of the universe. The air was cool, and a faint scent of pine drifted in from the woods nearby. Emma had gone to bed early after insisting that Sophie take the good chair and whispering to her dad that she'd already brushed her teeth twice. Sophie looked up at the constellations overhead. I forgot how quiet it is out here. Liam chuckled. That's because you spend your nights in a glass tower. She smiled but didn't look at him. It's strange. The city makes you feel important. But silence. It makes you feel honest. He glanced at her, then noticing how different she looked in the dim backyard light. Not polished, not powerful. Just real. That's why I sit out here sometimes, he said. To remember what's underneath the noise. She nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. I've built a life on noise. Liam turned his eyes to the sky. Then maybe it's time to listen to the quiet. For a few minutes they sat in companionable silence, broken only by the creak of a tree branch in the wind and the hum of faraway traffic. Then Sophie spoke, almost in a whisper. Do you ever feel like you're pretending, she asked, like you're performing what people expect of you instead of just being? He didn't answer right away. Then, every day, at least until about 8 to 10 p.m. when Emma asks me to help brush her unicorn's hair, and I remember I'm just a dad trying to survive. Sophie laughed, and it was a sound Liam wished he could bottle. It wasn't refined or delicate, it was unguarded. I think I envy that, she said. That your life has something pure in it. Something that doesn't want anything from you but your presence. He glanced at her. Maybe you're just around people who forgot how to want the right things. She looked down, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. That includes me. No, Sophie, Liam said gently. You called at 12:04 because a part of you remembered who you are, past the CEO, past the image. That part of you is still there. You're just learning to listen to her again. She didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered under the stars. And for a while, that was enough. But even the most honest nights have a morning after. The next week, Sophie sat at the head of the long executive boardroom table. Her hair was pinned up her blouse immaculate, her words sharp. Around her were 8 men and women in expensive suits, but not one of them looked at her the way Liam had. And that terrified her. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't want to impress them. She wanted to be known. But the room didn't allow for that. Not in this world. Not in this company she'd built with sweat and perfection. She could feel herself slipping back into the persona, the voice, the armor. George, her longtime COO and trusted lieutenant, leaned forward mid-meeting. There's buzz around your little visitor in the lobby last week. One of the junior PR guys saw you talking to a maintenance contractor. Is that something I should be concerned about?" Sophie's jaw tightened. "He's a friend." George arched a brow. "From what part of your world?" Her silence was its own kind of answer. George exhaled, voice lowering. "You have a reputation to protect. Personal stories get out, especially when they don't fit the narrative. And we both know the press will twist any crack in the armor." Sophie looked down at the table at the pen in her hand, at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized anymore. After the meeting, she walked past her office and kept going straight to the elevator, straight to the lobby, straight into the open air. That night, Liam waited for her, not at 12:04, at 8:30 with hot chocolate and an extra blanket, watching the stars and listening for footsteps that never came. At 9:30, he checked his phone. No text, no voicemail. By 10:15, Emma wandered out in her pajamas. "She's not coming?" she asked sleepily. Liam shook his head. "Not tonight." Emma climbed into his lap, curling under his arm like a kitten. "Maybe she's scared." "Of what?" "Of liking us." Liam stared out into the night. "Maybe." Emma's breath slowed as she drifted off warm and small against him. He looked up at the sky, the same stars overhead. But tonight they felt farther away. Sophie didn't call that night, or the next. At the end of the week, Sophie found herself back in her office, staring at the framed magazine cover on her wall. Bennett Media's Woman of the Year. But all she could see was what wasn't in the frame. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't real. The version of her that sat under stars in a backyard sipping cocoa and laughing at unicorn hair was missing entirely. And she missed that version of herself more than anything. Later that night, alone in her car on a side street 2 blocks from Liam's house, she stared at her phone. She didn't dial. Instead, she whispered into the silence of her car, "I'm not okay, but I still want to try." The wind had picked up just after midnight, rustling the branches outside Liam's window. He lay in bed, one arm behind his head, the other resting across his chest phone inches from his hand. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed into you rather than offered rest. He hadn't heard from Sophie in 5 days. Not since that last night she'd promised to meet under the stars. He'd told himself he wouldn't call her, that she needed space, that maybe she'd slipped back into her old life, into the fortress of corner offices and curated perfection. But that didn't make the ache any less. He closed his eyes. And then, as if summoned by the beat between 2 heartbeats, the phone rang. Not a message, not a voicemail, a call. 12:04 a.m. Liam sat up, breath-catching, and answered without looking. "Hello?" There was a pause, a breath, and then her voice soft and frayed at the edges. "I didn't know if you'd answer." He swallowed hard. "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I almost didn't," she whispered. "I parked outside your street 3 nights ago. I watched your porch light go out. I couldn't get out of the car." Liam's chest tightened. "You were here. I couldn't face you," she admitted. "Not after disappearing like that." "Why did you—" Sophie didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice cracked. "Because I'm scared of what it means when someone sees me without the mask and stays." Liam leaned forward, fingers pressing into the blanket. "You don't have to be perfect for me to stay, Sophie. That's easy for you to say. You're grounded, real. You've lost things and survived. I've just hidden." Liam exhaled slowly. "You think I didn't hide after Claire died?" She stilled. "Claire, my wife," he said quietly. "It's been 3 years. Car accident. Emma was only 3. I hid in silence and work and keeping just busy enough not to feel the emptiness. I know what it's like to be afraid of being seen." Sophie's breath hitched. "I didn't know. I never told you. Not because I was protecting myself, but because I didn't want you to feel like you had to carry my pain, too. I wish you had told me." He smiled sadly. "I just did?" Silence settled between them, not heavy but full. Then Sophie said I lost someone too, my dad, a year ago. He was the only person who made me feel like I didn't have to be impressive to be loved. When he died, Brent, my fiancé, left. Said I wasn't myself anymore, but the truth is, I didn't know who that was to begin with. Was that the night you called me? Yes, she said. I left a gala. Everyone was laughing and networking and being important. I felt like I was screaming into a soundproof room. So, you picked up the phone. I didn't mean to call you. I meant to call the grief hotline. But I misdialed. Liam's throat tightened. And, still, we talked. We did more than talk, Sophie whispered. You reminded me I was still human, that I hadn't completely disappeared. Liam's voice was soft. You were never gone. You just forgot how to come home. Another pause. Then, through a shaky breath, Sophie said, Liam, I don't know what this is, but I miss you, not just your voice. You. He let her words settle raw and sincere. The woman who once spoke with polished power was now just a woman who wanted to be loved without conditions. I miss you too, he said. And I don't need to define this, but I do want to keep building it. I'm not good at building, she said, almost apologetically. You don't have to be. I've got the tools, he replied with a gentle smile in his voice. Sophie laughed, the sound small but warm. That was terribly corny, and completely true. They were quiet for a long moment, each absorbing the presence of the other in the safest space they knew, not the daylight, not the roles they wore, but the fragile place between midnight and dawn. Then Sophie asked, Can I come over? Not tonight. But soon Liam's heart beat faster. Anytime he said, The porch light stays on for a reason. The next morning, Liam found Emma at the breakfast table with her cereal and her coloring book. She looked up with sleepy eyes. Did she call? He paused, surprised. How'd you know? Emma shrugged. Because you're smiling again. Liam ruffled her curls. She might visit soon. Emma grinned. Then I better draw her something better than a stick figure this time. Elsewhere in the city, Sophie stood in front of her bathroom mirror wiping away the last smudge of mascara from eyes that had wept, not from sadness, but from release. She looked at herself, not as a CEO, not as a woman who'd been left, not as a voice in the dark, but as someone coming back into her own skin. She pulled out her phone and typed a message. Thank you for waiting in the silence. I'm ready to be seen now. She hit send. Then she stepped into the sunlight. The invitation wasn't extravagant. No formal letter, no catered setting. Just a simple text from Sophie Company Gala this Saturday. Come as you are. Bring Emma if she wants. I'd like you to see my world. Not to impress you. To share it. Liam stared at the message for a long time. He read it twice, then again. He wasn't a gala man. He didn't own a suit. He hadn't shaken hands with men in ties since his military discharge, and even then the handshakes felt more like contracts than connection. Still, the tone of her message was gentle, honest, not a test, an invitation. That night, over dinner, he asked Emma, You remember Sophie's Company? Emma looked up from her plate of spaghetti. The building with the shiny floors. That's the one. She sent us an invitation. They're having a big party Saturday night. Emma's eyes widened. A party with real napkins and music, something like that. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Will there be dancing? Liam smiled. Possibly. Emma grinned. Then you can't say no. On Saturday, Liam stood in front of the bathroom mirror, awkwardly adjusting the collar of a borrowed blazer. Gail had found it in her late husband's closet, swearing it still had charm left in the seams. The sleeves were a touch long, but the shoulders fit. He smoothed his hair, exhaled, and stepped into the living room. Emma gasped like she'd just seen Superman step off the page. Daddy, you look like a movie star. He laughed, slightly red. You think so? She nodded, clutching her tiny clutch purse. Sophie is gonna faint. Let's hope not. The Bennett Media Gala was held at the Downtown Art Museum, a breathtaking venue with glass ceilings and soft lighting that made the paintings shimmer like reflections on water. As Liam entered, with Emma, he felt every pair of eyes flick toward him. Not with malice, but with curiosity. The man in worn dress shoes. The man holding the hand of a little girl in sparkly sneakers. He almost turned back, but then he saw her. Across the gallery floor, Sophie stood beneath a suspended sculpture of cascading lights wearing a simple dark blue dress that caught the room like moonlight in motion. She wasn't holding a wine glass. She wasn't networking. She was waiting. And the moment she saw them, her face changed not for show, but for real. She smiled and it reached her eyes. She walked toward them, her steps deliberate but unhurried as though she was walking toward the most important decision of her life and had already made it. "Hi," she said, kneeling in front of Emma. "You must be the one who gives the best advice." Emma nodded. "I told Daddy you were worth showing up for." Sophie laughed, glancing up at Liam. "She's not wrong." Then she stood. The room seemed to fade. Liam offered a hand. "You look real," she finished teasing, but soft. "Yes, and beautiful." She took his hand. "You ready to meet my world? I'm more interested in meeting the version of you that lives behind it." That stopped her, just for a beat. Then she leaned in and kissed his cheek. "Come on," she whispered. "I want you to see what I've built, then tell me what I might have missed." Over the next hour, Liam met her colleagues aboard her assistant, who eyed him with barely veiled surprise, and a man in glasses named Jonathan, who asked pointedly, "So, you're the guy?" "The guy?" Liam asked. Sophie answered, "The one who answered when I needed someone most." Jonathan blinked, then offered a respectful nod. Emma, meanwhile, stole the show, complimenting a woman's shoes, eating a mini cupcake in one bite, and asking a violinist how long it took to learn to make feelings come out of strings. But the real moment came when Sophie stood on stage to address the room. She spoke clearly, confidently, but not polished, not scripted. As most of you know, she began this year has been one of change for me personally and for the company. What you may not know is that the most valuable thing I've gained this year didn't come from strategy or sales. She paused. The room stilled. It came from a phone call. A wrong number, actually. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. I called in the middle of a panic attack thinking I was reaching a hotline. But the man who answered wasn't a professional. He was a father, a widower, a stranger who chose to stay on the line not because it was his job, but because it was his nature. She looked directly at Liam. Since then, I've come to believe that true success isn't what we build for the world, it's who we become when no one's watching, and who we choose to stay with when the lights are low. There was a hush then, quiet, genuine applause. Emma tugged Liam's hand. "She means you, Daddy." "I know," he said, voice thick. After the speech, as people mingled and music filled the hall again, Sophie returned to them. Liam met her eyes. "That was brave." "No," she said. "That was honest. I think I've spent my whole life chasing applause, but tonight I just wanted to be known." And now he asked. She reached out, fingers brushing his. "Now I want to see what it feels like. To build something that doesn't need to impress anyone." He looked down at her hand, then at Emma, spinning in circles under the twinkle lights. He squeezed Sophie's hand. "Then let's build it." On Monday morning, Sophie stepped into the executive elevator of Bennett Media with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't come from victory or strategy, but from waking up and knowing she no longer had to perform to be worth loving. She wore no jewelry, no designer heels, just a tailored navy suit and a quiet kind of confidence. The gala had gone better than she could have imagined. Her words, raw and unscripted, hadn't just landed, they'd settled into the hearts of the people who mattered most. And Liam. He had stayed by her side through it all, not as her statement, but as her anchor. But as the elevator doors opened to the 20th floor, Sophie felt the shift before she saw it. George was already waiting by her office door. The look on his face wasn't rage. It was worse control wrapped in politeness. "Good morning," he said evenly. Sophie met his eyes. "George, do you have a moment?" He gestured toward the glass-walled conference room where 3 board members waited inside, their expressions unreadable. Sophie hesitated. "Sure." Inside, George closed the door and turned, hands clasped like a lawyer preparing to present his case. "I'll get right to it," he said. "There's been talk after the gala." About what Sophie asked, voice steady. "About you, about your speech, about the man you brought." Sophie didn't flinch. "Liam." George gave a tight smile. "Yes." "Liam, the working-class contractor you described as the man who saved you. That's what happened." One of the board members, a woman named Diana, leaned forward. "Sophie, it was a lovely speech, but it's raised questions, concerns." "Concerns," Sophie repeated. George nodded. "Shareholders are wondering if your personal entanglements are beginning to cloud your professional judgment. You're seen as the face of Bennett Media, and your face has always been polished, aspirational." Sophie inhaled deeply. "And now it's human. That's the problem, isn't it?" Diana exchanged a glance with another member. "You know how perception works in our industry. Your identity has value. That value must be protected. And if I choose to protect what's real instead of what's marketable?" Sophie asked calmly. George tilted his head. "We're not saying you can't have a personal life, but when it becomes the headline, when it challenges the narrative, then we have to talk about optics, about the brand." Sophie stood still, but inside her something cracked. Not from the criticism, but from the realization they didn't see her. They saw what she'd built for them. And now that she wanted to be herself, she was a threat. She thought of Liam, of Emma spinning beneath museum lights, of laughter on a back porch and silence that healed. She looked George in the eye. "I won't apologize for being a person, for loving someone who reminds me who I am when the noise stops." "Sophie," George began, but she raised a hand. "If that's unacceptable to the board, then let's be clear about it. I won't pretend anymore. I won't hide the parts of me that make me whole." No one spoke, so she turned and walked out. That evening she didn't wait for 12:04. She called Liam at 7:46. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said, and though she wanted to be strong, the tremor in her voice gave her away. "I had a meeting this morning," she began, "with the board." "What happened?" he asked gently. "They told me that being with you, being myself, puts the company at risk." Silence. Then Liam's voice, soft but sure. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said. "I believe that I finally said something real, and the people who benefited from my mask got scared." He didn't speak right away. When he did, it wasn't with reassurance. It was with truth. "You don't have to choose me," he said, "but you shouldn't have to choose against yourself." That stopped her cold. She blinked into the quiet of her car parked outside the grocery store. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "You're doing what no one ever taught us to do," he said. "You're choosing wholeness over performance." Tears blurred her vision. "Why are you so steady when I'm falling apart?" He laughed softly. "Because I've fallen apart before. I know what it sounds like when the pieces start to fall into place instead of away." 2 days later, Sophie stood at the head of the conference table again. Same board, same polished glass. But this time she brought a folder. Inside it, her resignation. Not a protest. Not a failure. A reclaiming. "I'm proud of what I built," she told them. "But if the cost of leadership is losing myself, then it's too high. This company deserves a face that's unshakable. I deserve a life that's unfiltered." Diana opened her mouth to protest. George didn't speak. Sophie smiled. "Thank you. For the years. And for the clarity." That night, she walked up the path to Liam's front door with Emma's drawing in her purse and peace in her step. Liam answered before she could knock. She smiled. "I quit today." He raised a brow. "You okay? I've never been more okay," she said. Then added, "Do you still have that porch light on?" He stepped aside, voice warm. "It's always been for you." The next morning, the sun spilled golden light over the kitchen counter where Sophie stood, sleeves rolled, flipping pancakes. She didn't need to. Liam was more than capable of making breakfast, but she insisted. Something about finally choosing this life made her want to live inside it. Emma sat at the table humming to herself as she drew another galaxy of crayon stars. Liam leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching the scene with a quiet wonder he didn't dare speak aloud. "You always this domestic," he teased. Sophie glanced over her shoulder. "Only when I'm nervous." "What for?" She smiled faintly. "Because this feels real. And real is terrifying." He walked over gently, took the spatula from her hand and replaced it with a cup of coffee. Then, let's be terrified together. They spent the day like a slow-breath library, books and errands, a trip to the farmer's market where Emma charmed every vendor, and an afternoon walk down by the river where Sophie kicked off her heels and waded barefoot with Emma, laughter echoing under the trees. As the sun began to dip, they returned home and sat on the porch wrapped in old blankets, sipping tea as evening came. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Sophie admitted softly. Liam nodded. "That's the problem with survival mode. Even when you're safe, your body doesn't believe it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So, what do? We keep showing up, until the fear runs out of breath." She smiled against his shirt. "That's poetic. That's exhaustion." He chuckled. "Poetry's a side effect." Later that evening, Emma was fast asleep with a flashlight still glowing under her blanket fort, and Liam stood in the backyard staring up at the stars alone. Sophie stepped out quietly, wrapping her arms around herself as the cool air brushed her skin. "Thought you disappeared on me," she said. "I was giving the stars a chance to show off before you came out and stole the spotlight." She rolled her eyes but smiled. "You always this charming. Only when I'm in love," he said so gently it didn't feel like a grand gesture. Just truth spoken plainly. Sophie stilled, not because she was unsure, but because for the first time those words didn't bring fear. They brought peace. She stepped closer. "Say it again." He turned to face her eyes, calm. "I'm in love with you." She took a breath. "Then I guess I should say it too." "You don't have to. I want to." She touched his face. "I'm in love with you, Liam Carter. Not the voice in the dark. Not the man I imagined. You. The man who listens when no one else knows what to say. The father who gives his daughter stars when she asks for cereal. The man who doesn't fix me, but lets me fix myself." A long silence passed between them. But it wasn't empty. It was full of history, of healing, of hope. Then Liam looked up. "Dance with me." Sophie blinked. "There's no music." He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped a playlist. A soft acoustic melody began to float into the night, gentle guitar, a voice like old velvet. "Now there is," he whispered. He held out his hand, and Sophie stepped into his arms. They swayed beneath the stars, surrounded by crickets and the faint hum of porch lights. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Inside the house, Emma peeked out from her blanket fort, watching from the window with a sleepy smile. She whispered to herself, "They found it." Then she turned off her flashlight and curled deeper into her blankets, secure in a world that finally made sense. A few days later, Sophie stood at a podium, not at a press conference, but at a quiet event hosted by a local nonprofit dedicated to mental health awareness. She was no longer CEO. She wasn't there in stilettos or designer labels. She was there in flats, jeans, and her truth. Behind her, on a banner, were the words, "The 1204 Foundation," because someone always needs you most in the dark. Sophie looked out at the modest crowd and smiled. "Many of you know I left the corporate world recently. Not because I failed, but because I realized success without soul is just performance. This foundation was born from a wrong number at the right time, from a conversation that saved me when I didn't think I deserved to be saved. and from a man who stayed on the line when he didn't have to. She turned, and Liam stood at the edge of the crowd, Emma holding his hand. Both were beaming. This foundation, Sophie continued, is for anyone who has ever felt invisible at midnight, and for the strangers who choose to see them anyway. That night, back on the porch as the clock inched toward 12:04 a.m., Liam glanced at his phone. It didn't ring. Instead, Sophie placed her hand over his. "You don't have to wait for the call anymore," she said. "Why?" "Because I'm already here." The seasons shifted quietly. Winter surrendered to spring, and with it came softer mornings, children's laughter in the park again, and evening skies blushing pink instead of gray. Life, Liam found, didn't announce healing like a thunderclap. It returned in whispers, small routines, familiar laughter, a home that finally felt full again. The house once shadowed by memory now bloomed with life. Sophie had moved in gradually, not with fanfare, but with toothbrushes, shared calendars, and the unmistakable scent of her coffee blend. Her shoes by the door, her laugh in the kitchen, her presence not loud but known. Emma had taken it all in stride, as children do when love walks in gently. She began calling Sophie my person at school, then bonus mom, in whispered goodnights. She asked questions like, "Do you think the stars miss us when it's cloudy, and will we still be together when I'm a grandma?" To both, Sophie had answered without hesitation, "Yes, always." One weekend afternoon, Sophie sat at the dining table with Emma, a cup of tea steaming beside her while Liam fixed a loose door hinge nearby. "What are you working on, Em?" Sophie asked. Emma held up a folded paper booklet with a crayon-drawn cover, Our Family Story, by Emma Carter. Inside were stick figures, bright colors, and short sentences scrawled in big, careful letters. Sophie flipped to the second page. It read, "My dad was sad." Then he talked to a lady in the phone. She was sad, too. Then they talked, and they were not sad. Then they hugged. Then we had pancakes. She smiled, blinking away sudden tears. "This is beautiful." Emma grinned. "It's for school. My teacher said stories help people remember." Sophie turned to the last page. "Now we are happy. I have a real home. And at night, nobody cries alone." Sophie reached out and pulled Emma into her lap. "You are going to change the world someday, sweetheart." "I already did," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I helped you both stop being scared." Liam, overhearing from across the room, placed his screwdriver down and walked over. He kissed Emma's forehead and met Sophie's eyes over her shoulder. "She's not wrong," he said. That evening they sat together on the back porch, a ritual now deeply rooted in their lives. The stars were bright, and the air smelled faintly of new grass and lilac. "I never told you something," Sophie said quietly. Liam turned to her. "That first night, the reason I misdialed. The last number of the grief hotline was a 4. I pressed a 3. Close miss, he said. Or perfect miss, she corrected, because the person who was supposed to answer did. He took her hand. Some calls aren't wrong. They're meant to find the one who's been listening all along." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You still keep the porch light on." "Always," he said. "But now it's not for someone who's lost." She looked up. "Then who is it?" For he kissed her temple. "For everyone who finds their way home." A few weeks later, the 1204 Foundation held its first full community event, a starlight storytelling night for families coping with grief, mental health challenges, and quiet loneliness. The auditorium was modest, filled with folding chairs, soft lamps, and warm voices. Liam stood at the back helping organize refreshments while Sophie welcomed guests. Emma was the first one to step onto the little stage. She wore her favorite yellow dress and clutched her story booklet. "My name's Emma," she said into the microphone, "and I want to tell you something real." The room quieted. A long time ago, my daddy was sad, and a lady was sad, and they didn't know each other. But one night they found each other just by listening. They didn't even know names yet. Just feelings. And then they got brave. She smiled wide. Now we have a home, not a house, a real home. And I want other people to know it's okay to be the one who calls, and it's okay to be the one who answers. There was not a dry eye in the room. After the event, as they packed up chairs and folded tablecloths, a man approached Liam, middle-aged with tired eyes and a voice as soft as gravel. "I lost my son last year," the man said. "Tonight was the first time I've heard someone say something that didn't feel like pity, just truth." Liam nodded. Sometimes truth needs a quiet place to land. The man shook his hand. "Thanks for building one." That night at 12:04 a.m., Liam's phone didn't ring. It hadn't in months, and yet he found himself glancing at it, not in fear, not in sadness, but in gratitude. Because 12:04 had once been the loneliest moment of his life,